I wanted to talk about cravings today. If you saw my post from yesterday, I'm pretty much going to cover what I talked about in that post, except elaborate a little bit more and talk a little bit about how you can manage cravings in real time, realistically, and in a simple way that's not going to stress you out even more, okay? So first of all, let's talk about cravings. Let's talk about the fact that there is this persistent and, in my opinion, very damaging belief that's being perpetuated in the fitness industry, in the nutrition industry, in the diet industry, etc., that cravings are something that we can eliminate entirely, something that if we do this particular diet or this particular plan or follow this particular protocol or program, that we will not experience any cravings, we'll be free from cravings. Wouldn't that be so great? But unfortunately, it's not possible. We cannot eliminate cravings entirely. And I think that there's this idea that success on a diet means not having cravings, not experiencing them. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Because if you're not experiencing cravings, there's something more serious going on. And because cravings are just they're as natural as they are unnatural. And what I mean by that is that they are both behavioral and chemical. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But for now, just know that it's not possible to entirely avoid cravings, and any program that leads you to believe that they can help you achieve that doesn't have your best interests in mind and doesn't really have the facts down, okay? So there's a real difference between suppressing cravings, meaning trying to ignore that they're there, trying to push them down, trying to pretend that they don't exist. There's a difference between that and managing cravings, or doing what I call riding the crave wave. So riding the crave wave is essentially not denying cravings, in fact, embracing them and recognizing them and actually anticipating them, knowing that they're going to come, and having some ways, some tools, some insights to manage them when they do, okay? So there's a difference between suppression of cravings, ignorance of cravings, and riding the crave wave, managing them. So what happens when we ignore cravings? What happens when we try to ignore them? It's not a pretty sight, right? We pretend that we don't actually want that piece of cake or that pizza or that cheese or whatever, and for a while we're pretty successful in avoiding it, right? But then eventually our willpower fades, and maybe it's late at night, maybe we are at happy hour, maybe we're at a work event, and we just can't withstand it anymore, and we give in to the craving, right? And we end up overeating as a result of trying to pretend that craving wasn't there in the first place. So the way to avoid this, the way to avoid getting to the point where we just overeat because we feel so depleted, so mentally depleted, is to take a more clinical approach to cravings, like I was talking about earlier, and be kinder to ourselves. So when I say taking a clinical approach to cravings, what I essentially mean is looking at them with a lens that is more about, okay, this is something that is happening to me, but it's not something that I caused, right? It's not because I did something wrong. It's not because I'm defective. It's not because I'm deficient. It's not because I'm wrong in some way or I'm not good enough in some way. It has nothing to do with me or you. It has nothing to do with the person experiencing the craving. It has to do with chemicals in our brain. It has to do with how we live our everyday life. It has to do with associations that we have with food, and these can go back to childhood, right? So when we consider the fact that, one, we're not ever going to be able to eliminate cravings, but we can manage them, I think that embracing a more kind approach, a more clinical, a more kind of desensitized approach to cravings is the key to identifying what's causing us to have the craving and creating workarounds, creating ways of preempting those triggers, right? So it's like, okay, I know a craving's gonna come. I know what causes me to experience cravings. What can I do? How can I retrace my steps so that those cravings are not so acute, so that they're not so strong, and they don't make me feel so powerless, okay? So it's all about management of cravings versus suppression of cravings or avoidance of cravings. And there's always a lesson to be learned when we experience a craving, both when we're able to ride the crave wave and avoid overindulging in something we don't actually want or need, and actually the aftermath of indulging. There's always a lesson to be learned in those situations. But what taking a clinical and kinder approach will do is help us to avoid those situations more often when we give in to the craving or give in to overeating, and it will increase the instances where we can manage our feelings around those cravings and recognize why we're experiencing the craving that we are, okay? So that getting kinder with ourselves has to do with stopping the judgment, okay? Stop judging ourselves for having what is a completely natural response and something that we really to a certain extent have no control over. So first of all, cravings can kind of be categorized in two ways, as I mentioned earlier. They're either behavioral or they're chemical. So a behavioral craving is a craving that results from participating in a certain behavior or having a routine, having a habit. Like, for example, going to the movies, and so you go to the movies and you have a craving for popcorn with butter and salt, right? It's just what you do when you go to the movies. Or you go home to visit your mom and dad, and your mom asks you what you want her to make for you, and you go home and it's almost like a free-for-all because you're back in that nest, and you feel you feel all these associations with food, so your cravings can feel kind of out of control. This actually happens to me quite often when I go home and I have to kind of take a couple of days in some instances to recalibrate my thinking and realize, okay, I can have this anytime I want. I don't need to have it right now. Why are these cravings so acute? And I think it has a lot to do with our associations, with what we think about when we think about certain foods, or what we think about when we're around certain foods or around certain people. Like, even people can be triggers for us. And so that's a behavioral craving. And then a chemical craving is something that happens like when we're on a diet and we are intentionally reducing our calories and we are in a calorie deficit. So our body is like, what the hell is going on? I need more food. And so everything looks delicious. Everything looks like the most delicious thing we could possibly imagine to eat, right? So we're craving anything and everything. And in those instances, usually our cravings are more for comfort foods, things with a lot of sugar or a lot of fat, things like that. So, and also chemical cravings can result when we, skip meals, right? And we skip meals and things like that. And, it gets to be the end of the night and it's like, oh my gosh, I did not eat breakfast or lunch. I am starving. Let me go to the drive-thru. And like I said, all of a sudden, things that we wouldn't normally choose to eat become delicious sounding options, right? And then another possibility another type of craving or instance that I would categorize as a behavioral type of craving would be like during our period. You know how we get very specific cravings for foods like chocolate and cheese and things like that, and that is definitely something going on. That's a hormonal thing, right? So those are the two types of cravings, behavioral and chemical. So, when you think about it like that, when you look at it, you kind of take a bird's eye view of what's going on when you experience a craving, it's hard to really give yourself a hard time, isn't it? It's hard to look at yourself and say, oh, you are such a loser, you'll never achieve your goals, like how could you have eaten that? It's hard to look at ourselves like that and criticize ourselves for having cravings when we realize, wow, to a certain extent, a lot of this is going on in our brain, and it's something that we don't even anticipate. It just comes on all of a sudden. And even things as simple as walking down the street, hearing a noise or a song, smelling something, walking past a bakery, things like that can immediately conjure up a craving. And it's really, when you think about it like that, it's hard to criticize ourselves for that, because it's not like we planned it. It's not like we did anything wrong. It just is. So when we think about cravings as something that just are, it makes it much easier to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and not criticize and critique ourselves for having and experiencing something that everyone experiences. And the people who seem to have it all down just are either just really good liars, or they've come up with ways that work for them, that are unique to them, that help them to manage and control their cravings. All right, it doesn't mean that they never have them. It just means that they have skills that have allowed them to sort of retrace their steps back up into those trigger behaviors and realize what it is and what kind of situations and circumstances trigger their cravings and how they can preempt those. Okay, so so how can we manage cravings? We can do several things. Number one, which is super easy, is staying hydrated. I find that when I'm not hydrated, I am more lethargic. My energy is so low. I literally feel parched. I might not actually think I'm thirsty, but I feel like I'm not supple or something, And when I don't feel that way, I feel like my cells are asleep. So in those situations, I think that cravings can become more difficult to ignore. So if I am experiencing a craving for something that I know that I don't really want, I'll say, okay, maybe I'm just thirsty, and I'll just guzzle a bunch of water. And even if that is not what eliminates the craving, at least it puts some distance between me and my need to eat. It gives me a little more time to mentally process, okay, what am I feeling? What's causing me to experience this craving? And what can I eat that's going to satisfy me but isn't going to derail my efforts, right? So water, staying hydrated, sleep. If you guys are on my Healthusiast Insider email list, you would have received an email this morning detailing all the reasons why sleep is so important for fat loss and just general wellness. So when we don't get enough sleep, there are so many negative impacts, right? It's harder for our body to burn fat. We hold on to body fat much easier. Cortisol levels are elevated. This is that stress hormone that can cause our bodies to cling on to body fat. We can experience chronic sleep deprivation, can cause us to experience increased cravings, decreased libido, lethargy, obviously. So many negative impacts of not getting enough sleep, increased hunger, cravings, etc., etc. So if you want to manage your cravings, make sure that you're getting enough sleep. It's also having enough sleep just makes your head feel clearer, helps you make better choices, instead of relying on caffeine or all these other things, which sometimes can trigger us to have cravings for more and worse things, right? I know that one of the things that I crave a lot is caffeine, and it's something that I experience almost without failure every day around this time. In fact, I was thinking about coming down here before jumping on live and grabbing a coffee, but I realized, nope, it's just a behavioral craving. I'm used to doing it, I do it a lot, and I don't need it, because what is an extra coffee in the afternoon going to do for me in terms of how well I sleep tonight? It's just kind of putting a Band-Aid on a bigger issue. And what is that bigger issue? Okay, well, I know that I haven't been getting enough vegetables lately, and I know that that's a chronic problem that I have, is not getting enough vegetables and fruits, and those things give me natural energy, right? They keep me hydrated, and they give me natural energy from all those vitamins and minerals. So I know that the more vegetables and fruits I have in my diet, the less likely I am to crave caffeine. Okay? So over-exercising is another thing that can help us, or decrease our ability to manage our cravings, makes it more difficult to sort of ride the crave wave, as I've said earlier. So make sure that you're not over-exercising. And I can't tell you how much exercise is too much for you. This is something that you kind of have to experiment with and sort of play around with by trial and error. But some things that could indicate that you're over-exercising: your cravings are exacerbated, you're not sleeping as well, you have more aches and pains than normal, you have trouble focusing, you know, your hunger is just off the charts. There's all kinds of ways to assess whether you might in fact be over-exercising. So again, over-exercise, something to avoid if you want to help yourself manage your cravings more effectively. Enjoying preemptive cheats. Now this is something, or preemptive foods, that are going to help you to manage your cravings in real time. So, like I said earlier, there's this misconception that success on a diet, or success on any type of nutrition plan, diet being just the way that you eat, that you won't, success is not having any cravings. So not true. So not true. And in fact, if we never give in to our cravings, if we never actually enjoy the foods that we really like, we're just going to end up indulging our cravings in ways that we would prefer to avoid, like overeating things that we're like, oh, that wasn't even that good, that wasn't worth it. So one way of managing cravings is to identify those several foods that you really love, that really are worth it to you, and the times that you have the opportunity to indulge in them, take it and don't feel guilty. Doing that is going to take the edge off. It's going to help you to avoid experiencing super strong cravings or indulging your cravings in things that you don't actually like eating. Okay? And then the last couple of things that I want to mention are getting enough protein. So just like I was saying, I feel like I can manage my cravings better when I have more fruits, vegetables, aka fiber, in my diet. A lot of people notice that they're better able to control their cravings and are less likely to feel like peckish and reach for things that they wouldn't really want to eat when they have enough protein in their diet. So a perfect example today of this is I've been consciously increasing my protein intake lately. And today a coworker had a birthday party, and the rest of his birthday cake was on the table in the back office. And he asked me if I wanted some, and I said, oh, maybe later. So I went and checked it out, and I looked at it, and I was like, you know what? This is not something that I would ever choose to eat intentionally. This is not something that I think is going to taste that great to me. It's not going to be worth it. If I eat it, I will probably regret it. So I forewent the cake, and I think it was easier to do so because I have more protein in my diet lately, and I've been staying hydrated and been prioritizing sleep. So that's just a perfect example of a behavioral craving. So I just happened to, the food was there. You know, sometimes we just see it and it's like, oh, I'm craving that. I want that. That's what's going to make me feel better. That's what I want right now. And yes, it scratches that initial itch, but it doesn't really help us in terms of identifying what our preferred indulgences are, and it doesn't help us to manage our cravings if we're just constantly giving in to every craving whim that we have. So keeping that protein intake higher helps me, will help you. And the last thing is coming up with alternatives, right? So yes, we're not always going to give in to our cravings, and even every time that we have the opportunity to indulge in things that we love, we might choose not to. But what are some alternatives, some snacks, some things that we can use to preempt our cravings that taste good to us, that aren't difficult to prepare? What are some of those things that we can do? So a friend of mine recently asked me, I've been craving a lot of comfort foods lately, like pizza and macaroni and cheese. And the things that I would normally eat for dinner and lunch are not appealing to me at all, like a piece of fish or a piece of chicken with a little rice and grilled vegetables or whatever. So I suggested, okay, well, maybe you can change the way you prepare those dishes, because maybe your cravings feel more acute because you're sick of the same old thing. So maybe changing up the preparation of your dinner. Like if you grill your chicken, maybe you can saute it. If you saute your chicken, maybe you can put it in a crock pot. There's always a way around a craving, right? There's always a way to manage a craving, to avoid, to not suppress it, to not avoid it, but to kind of confront it head on and say, I'm in control here, you're not, and I don't feel powerless to food. I don't feel vulnerable to food. I know what to do. I have a tool. I have a strategy. And the more you employ these strategies, the more you customize them to your lifestyle and to your preferences, the more success you're going to have. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun talking about that. So let me know in the comments what you think, and I will talk to you guys soon.